Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello and welcome to episode 55. I have been recording episodes for you for over a year, and I'm loving every moment of it. I particularly love hearing from you all. I get lots of messages like this one. I recently discovered your podcast. Thank you for doing this amazing work. I feel so incredibly validated. I'm beyond grateful for your candid stories and authenticity in describing the situations, and then the resolve to follow. I really don't feel crazy anymore, or feel like he's crazy for not understanding me. Just warms my heart whenever I hear from people about how this podcast is helping them. And if it's been helping you, or if you want it to reach more people, to help more people, I would be so thrilled and honored if you would leave a review and a rating of this podcast. It actually helps it reach more people. You can do that on Apple Podcasts and many of the other platforms where you find and listen to podcasts. So thank you so much for doing that. And for those of you who already have, a big hug and squeeze to you. All right, so today I want to talk about seemingly innocuous thoughts. So really, this is for you if you feel like there's ever a sense of kind of like lacklusterness, right? A lack of luster or dullness in your marriage, or just an underlying sense of disconnection. And you find yourself perhaps even wondering if things will never really feel good, alive, and totally loving again between you and your partner, or any of that kind of just anything less than happiness and vibrancy and lots of love and connection. If you're having any other experience in that, this episode is definitely for you. I want to tell you today that it really might not be like any of this might not be because there's any really big, overarching, big problem. In fact, it's likely that that isn't the case. It's much more likely that it's simply because of some seemingly innocuous, seemingly somewhat harmless thoughts going through your mind. So bear with me as I share about this. We have talked before about how our thinking, the stories that go through our mind, right, the way we interpret our lives and what's happening, our thinking, in other words, dictates so much of our experience in our marriages. It has been a little while since I've talked about this, so we're going to be talking about this today. But today I really want to dive in on how something so little and harmless seeming as a simple little thought, right? Not even a super negative thought can seriously dampen down the love and joy in your marriage and really create division and distance with your partner, right? Irritation, disinterest, and just like not feeling connected, or even like you want to be connected, it really comes from the accumulation, kind of ongoing ticker tape of thoughts going through your mind. And when I say the word thoughts, what I'm really talking about, my definition, is more than just sentences that are going through your mind that are kind of easy to hear and, see or sense that are there. It's more like thoughts can be more diffuse right? Like more like a sense of something, really more of an impression sort of on the subconscious level, right? And the amazing thing is that if we turn a sort of metaphoric flashlight to our internal experience, we can often articulate that experience, these impressions or thoughts, in the form of words, like, right? Like bring them out into the form of language. That's what I'm meaning by thoughts here. It's a lot more than actual just thoughts you can hear, like there's someone talking to you in your head. Okay. All right. So I really want to illustrate how these everyday sort of undramatic thoughts can really lead to feeling less than connected and happy with your husband. Right? And I want to do this with a recent experience, a personal experience that brought this very much to light in my own marriage. And I'm also going to share how I moved through this so you can see how this works, and really even so you can begin to start moving the needle on these smaller things that really dull the love and connection that you could be experiencing with your partner. So my husband and two of our sons went away for a week this summer, and I was here at home and just really enjoying the sense of spaciousness in the house, right? The quietness. Don't we all love that? It was a treat. But I started noticing that when my husband would call me, which was maybe once or twice a day, in my head, I'd kind of be like, oh, great, more communication with him. I noticed that I just didn't really have a lot of interest in connecting. And as I noticed that, instead of falling into some super negative spiral and thinking something was terribly wrong, although you'll see there was a little of that, I got curious about why I wasn't wanting to connect. Really just curious about why I was feeling that way. And so I did what I call a thought download. I've talked about this before on the podcast, but a thought download is a super basic go-to tool that I love my clients to use regularly. It's really just, it's a great thing to do when you're feeling something you don't really want to be feeling, right? Or you notice you're feeling some negative emotion, right? Or in this case, feeling distance or disconnected or dull in your marriage, right? So I just let myself download all the thoughts in my brain about my husband calling and how I felt. I like to, as part of this, I really always encourage and make sure I do this myself, like let my, lizard brain thoughts, right? Let the negative part of my brain have a voice, right? Just to really be able to see what's going on inside of our heads. Okay. So what I noticed as I did this was that in this case, none of my thoughts were really terrible. Some of them were, what I call flaw sight thoughts. I've done a few episodes about flaw sight, where I'm kind of seeing things through a negative lens, right? So there were some of those there for sure, not anything too extreme, but they weren't really strong. What really stood out to me was a couple of what seemed like kind of just boring, seemingly harmless, like not so negative thoughts. Specifically, the ones that stood out to me were these two thoughts. It's too tiring to be around him. And it's so same old, same old. Those are really interesting. So I decided to spend some time really investigating them a little bit more. So this is how I did that. I wrote down what I felt when I was thinking these thoughts. And I'm mostly going to I'm going to share right now with you more specifically the thought, what I felt when I was thinking it's too tiring to be around him. So when I thought that, I felt repelled and drained. That was interesting to see. And then I asked myself what I did when I was thinking it's too tiring to be around him and feeling repelled and drained. And this, I'm just going to share with you the list, and it's not even a full list, right, of what would happen, what I would do when I was feeling that way. I would close off to him on our calls, and I would kind of avoid talking to him for a while, right? Like I'd want to get off the phone call quickly. I would, resist engaging with him too much on those calls. I would then also get caught up in a negative thought spiral, right? So when we're like, when I feel that way, what am I doing? We want to look at like, what are we doing inside our heads, right? So I was having more thoughts about how out of sync his enthusiasm was from my state of being, right? I was really focusing, in other words, on how much energy it took to listen to him ramble on. Yeah. And I noticed I was judging him in real time, right? And feeling tense and on edge around him. And I was also asking myself in my head, what's wrong with me? This is my husband, right? And telling myself I shouldn't feel this way, right? I shouldn't be this way with him. After all, he's my husband, right? And of course, then I was feeling guilty about it and ultimately acting kind of defensive and irritated. Yeah. And so then I looked at what is the result of all of that? What's the result for me? And what's the effect on that between us? So for me, it cut off. The result really was that I was cutting off access to having loving feelings and a sense of connection, right? It was making me more tired, more drained to have this whole sort of drama internally. That was very interesting and enlightening to see. And I decided to do a little bit more self-coaching on this by asking myself one of my very favorite questions. And that was, what would my experience be if I wasn't thinking this thought that it's too tiring to be around him? And my answer was, I'd feel peaceful and just present with him, just present with myself, right? Without this thought, I'd be receptive to his enthusiasm and his attention, right? And I'd maybe even feel connected and feel enjoyment when we're on that call, right? When I hear the phone ring, I'd be able to enjoy life with and near my husband. Looking at my experience with the thought and looking at my experience without that thought is always sort of surprising and enlightening. And in this case, I was really happy to see that I was the one creating my own tiredness, right? It wasn't him. It wasn't him and all his words and all the ways he was behaving. No. He is not too tiring to be around, right? It was my mind that was too tiring for me to be around, right? It's my own brain that is tiring because my mind was busy, looking for flaws in him, telling me he was too tiring, sort of spinning out in this negative thought loop, telling myself that something was wrong with me, telling me I shouldn't be having this experience, right? Leading to feelings of tenseness and irritation. Yeah. So I was really tiring myself out simply by having this thought and kind of letting myself run wild with it, right? Which is what we do when we believe a thought that we're having. So this kind of investigating that I did, this sort of observing, noticing the effect of a thought that we're having, this is really just the first power of this thought work, right? Really being able to see with so much clarity that it's not our partner who's causing our experience. It's incredibly good news when we see this, because we can then choose to do something about it, right? If we don't like the experience that we're creating for ourselves, right? It's something that's within us, so it's something that we can control. We can choose to change, right? So for me, in this case, I knew that I wanted to feel like connecting, right? I wanted to feel happy and excited when my husband called me, when we were talking on the phone, right? I wanted to feel love and connection with him, of course. And so I was able to shift my thinking and see really clearly, right? Again, that he wasn't tiring to be around. Instead, he was kind of like a blank canvas for me to paint my thoughts on, right? So I want you to really hear that. Your man is like a blank canvas that you paint your thoughts onto, right? You project your thoughts onto, and then you reap the experience of those projections. You reap the feelings that come from those projections. Yeah. If I think it's too tiring to be around him, for example, I will experience being tired around him in a big way, being drained around him. And of course, feeling kind of repelled because I don't want to feel drained and tired. Make sense? So as soon as I stopped believing the thought that he's tiring, and this other thought, it's the same old, right? Sort of the same type of seemingly innocuous thought, right? Same old, right? As soon as I saw that my brain was creating this tired, draining experience of him, I suddenly felt free of its spell. When we can see that, like, oh, this is just a thought. This is just a way my system is interpreting something, right? My brain is interpreting something. It's not actually a fact that he's too tiring to be around, right? Then suddenly that thought doesn't have the same power over us, right? And from that place, we're able to explore a new thought or new ways of seeing things that feel truer and feel way better, right? So for me, in this case, it was this thought, being with him is peaceful when I choose peaceful thoughts. Being with my husband is peaceful when I choose peaceful thoughts. This was like a light bulb for me in that moment, right? And what it turned on in me was really a sense of empowerment and peace, right? Peace. And a sense of like, I'm in charge of my experience. And isn't that amazing? It became really obvious, really clear, right? That I could feel peaceful in his presence. I could even feel enjoyment. I could feel connection. I could feel fondness, right? I could feel relaxed and energized. And that was up to me, right? It became so clear that that was up to me by shifting my thinking. Now, one of the effects that this has is when we start to see, oh, I'm in charge of my experience, right? Is that we can then stop putting the focus and the blame on our partner and start doing that 180, that pivot, and look back at what else we might be needing in the moment, right? And I noticed that for me, that this kind of line of thinking, like it's too tiring to be around him, so much of that was just coming from a place in me that was exhausted, just kind of worn out, and also kind of bored with the same routine in my life. Not bored with my husband, right? But hey, pandemic was still going. It's been a long time of like me being in the house a lot, right? And I was working like extra hard in the summer when this was going on. And there was just a lot of like this routine was starting to feel sort of stagnant and depleting. Yeah. It wasn't my husband. It was something going on in me. And I want to point out that this can be super common for highly sensitive people. We actually have somewhat of a narrow bandwidth of where we feel most alive and thriving and vibrant and good, right? So I've talked a lot on the podcast about how if we're too stressed and overwhelmed, like if that's going on for you and you've been in go, go, go mode, like I was at that point in the summer, it can be so exhausting for our sensitive systems, right? So depleting, right? But this is also really interesting to take note of if we're too understimulated as highly sensitive people, we can kind of end up in the doldrums, right? So I had a combination of those two going on. I was a little overly worked and I was understimulated in the way of like sort of different types of things like social interactions and travel, like getting out of my little mini orbit, right? So from that place of kind of the doldrums, it's, or, overwhelm or depletion and exhaustion, from those places that are really kind of out of whack, out of balance, those are the places where our sensitive brains can really begin to think in very predictable, sort of negative types of ways, right? Again, like flaw sight. And what I mean by that is kind of like walking around looking at our partner and the world with like puke colored glasses, right? Negatively focused glasses. Episode 20 dives into more specifics on flaw sight if you're interested. Another sort of predictable negative type of way our brain focuses when we're in those kinds of spaces is really like having sort of other focused, blamey kinds of thinking, right? Negative, blamey, resentfully kind of focus towards our partner, or kind of seeing him as like the bad other. So it's natural for our brain to start going in those directions when we aren't sort of in this somewhat narrow, balanced emotional state. Okay. Like nervous system wise. So what I knew from this, observing this, was that I just really needed to take care of my nervous system better that week and change up the scenery, right? Like go to a new place and go on a walk on a different road. It's just as little simple as that, right? Do a little bit more unwinding, create a little bit more spaciousness and sort of like movement inside of me and my life. Yeah. And then it would be absolutely easy to stop thinking thoughts, these like negative, sort of somewhat dull thoughts, like he's too tiring to be around, right? Because I wouldn't be so tired and I wouldn't be fueling my exhaustion with my own thinking. So once I saw all this, I got to work and did that. I put on some great music in my living room and did some dancing to shake me out of the place where I was. I took some naps, did some of my favorite nervous system practices. And the result of doing all that and also dropping those boring, dull thoughts about my husband, the result of that was that when I thought of my husband, I felt sort of this sense of like fun, right? Like little sprinkles of excitement, right? And I started looking forward to seeing him again and talking to him on the phone. And our conversations felt enjoyable and connected and nice again. And then I was happy when he came home. So this is really the power of being able to step back and take a good look at your own thinking, your own thoughts. And by doing so, really take ownership of how you're creating your own experience. And then be able to decide if you want to do something about that experience you're creating, if you want to change it and create a better experience for yourself or not, right? You don't have to, of course, right? And then you get to decide what it is you really want to experience, right? You get to feel that authority, that agency over your experience, and then you can make that happen. So, our thoughts really, y'all, they are so powerful, right? Even the somewhat mundane, seemingly harmless ones have a very real and tangible effect, right? The sentences that go through our mind are so powerful, so start looking at them, right? And the beliefs, right? The underlying beliefs that are kind of stored away in the subconscious, stored away in the basement, like I've talked about in episode 16, Uncovering the Source of Relationship Pain. Those thoughts and beliefs are so powerful, but they don't have to rule your life. They don't have to rule the experience of your marriage, right? And if you don't want them to, if you want to have a much better experience in your marriage and feel so much more connected, so much more love, so much more secure, all the things, start taking a serious look at what your thoughts are, right? Notice how they affect you. Investigate them. A really simple starting place is to do a thought download, like I described earlier, about your husband, right? Or about something going on between you. And then choose one of those thoughts from that thought download, right? And ask yourself, when I think this thought, how do I feel? Write that down. Just one feeling, maybe two. And then when I'm feeling that feeling, what do I do? What goes on through my mind? How do I act? What do I say? How do I treat myself? Right? What do I do? How do I treat him? Yeah. And then lastly, ask yourself, what is the effect of all of these actions and feelings and this particular thought? What is the effect of that on myself and in our relationship? What's the result of that? And if you notice that you really don't love what that particular thought or those thoughts are creating for you, you can choose to question them, right? You can choose to ask if they're true, and you can play with what else is available for you to think instead, right? What else might be true? What else might be truer? Now, what I've shared with you today is really a gold mine. Like, it might sound a little like simplistic and maybe a little weird to you right now. And that's okay. It used to seem that way to me too. But this is huge if you start applying this to your life, to your thinking. It's going to free you up in huge ways. But I do want to share one more thing, which is that this thought work, doesn't work so well if you're coming from self-judgment. To shift your feelings in your entire experience in your marriage, it really requires looking at yourself, the things you think, feel, say, and do, with non-judgment, right? Without judgment. Really, ideally being curious about it, coming from this kind of kind, compassionate observer place inside of yourself, right? Coming from this place of compassion for your own amazing, sensitive human self. If you want to take any of this deeper, I am here for you in so many ways. You can head on over to my website, www.lifeisworthloving.com, to find out how many things are there, how many ways I'm here for you to support you in having a marriage and a life just chock full of love, enjoyment, connection, and fulfillment. Be oh so well.